I think America must see that riots do not develop out of thin air. But in the final analysis, a riot is the language of the unheard.
Many people think that the capital of Washington State is Seattle or Tacoma, but that is actually incorrect. The capital of Washington State is actually Olympia, and now you would think that Olympia is the capital of a solid blue state, and so you would think that there would be some allies and some progressive folks, and that there were always progressive folks in these areas. Well, allow me to unburden you of that notion. You see, back in the day, Olympia, Washington was a very different place, and now some may argue it hasn't changed much, and you'll see evidence of that throughout this whole entire video. But what you need to understand is that this is the capital of a so-called progressive enclave, and yet when you look at the history and the racial makeup that still affects us to this very day, you will see that a lot of lies were told about the so-called progressive nature of Washington State. So let's start from the beginning. You see, Olympia, Washington is located in Thurston County in Washington State, and if you want to understand the kind of racism that Olympia, Washington usually puts out towards black folks, well, this is a list of all the black codes and all the black exclusion laws that were in Thurston County, and we're gonna count just how many black codes existed in Thurston County. But first off, let's understand what you're dealing with here. See, these black codes were located in Olympia and Thurston County from 1928 until 1955, and the University of Washington has documented more than 1,600 restricted properties in 35 subdivisions. Barnes Donation Claim number 65. No lot or dwelling shall be rented, leased, or sold to any black person, Asian person, or mixed race person, or any Hispanic person. And the language was a lot more offensive, but you know, I'm trying to be a little bit more sensitive than your so-called allies and so-called progressive enclave. The developers were Felix and Luis Balcanos. It covered one property, and this happened in 1947. Here is Bates extension of Hazard Stevens Park, which once again you couldn't sell, lease, or rent to any black person, Hispanic person, Asian person, or anyone who just wasn't white. The developer was James and Kate Bates. It covered 83 properties, and this came in 1935. So we're up to 84, and maybe the city of Olympia should come clean with the high school students at Olympia High School and also the parents of those high school students, and tell them about the high school sitting upon racist land, because this school sits upon the land that was once owned by the Bates family. And yeah, that's actually accurate. What you're seeing on the screen before you is a before and after picture of where that high school currently sits, and yet you have people in Olympia who want to deny the racist past of Olympia, Washington. Which is amazing, because I think the high school students should be warned that if they are non-white and they see a ghost after dark, that maybe they should run away, because that ghost may not realize that times have changed and that black people can be outside after dark. It'd be a real shame if the foreign exchange student is snatched up by the ghost of racist past. You know, since Juneteenth is coming up, perhaps that's a good little Juneteenth assignment for the high school students there, so that they don't accidentally do a seance and instigate a hate crime. You have the Bates Monroe subdivision. Once again, you couldn't sell to or rent to or lease to anyone who was black, Latino, or just wasn't white. It covered 20 properties, and this came in 1929. So we're up to 104. Here is Beechcrest. It says no other than the white race shall be allowed to occupy any residence in this subdivision except for servants. So a black person could stay there, but they had to be a servant. The developer was Beechcrest Incorporated, Bailey Hilton, and it covered 507 properties, and it came in the year of 1948. So now we're up to 611. So for all you fake allies out there who want to say, oh, you're a Trump supporter or a Russian asset, well, you know, maybe Russia should pay more black people to put out the truth like this. You have Belvedere. No persons of any race other than the white or Caucasian race shall use or occupy any building or any lot, except that this covenant shall not prevent occupancy by domestic servants of a different race domiciled with an owner or tenant. So basically, you could be Latino, Asian, or black, or Native American, but you just couldn't live there. You had to be a servant. You could stay there if you were a servant. The developer was Geo Yantis. It covered 44 properties and it came in 1940. And so this last property causes me to question the entire Democratic Party in Washington State, because the developer for the Belvedere subdivision was none other than George Yantis. And George Yantis is a big deal in Washington State because he was once the Speaker of the Washington State House of Representatives. This guy served in political office, and he was not a Republican. No, he's a Democrat, which shows you that the Democratic Party was never a friend to black people if they've done nothing to correct the racism that George Yantis subjected black people to. Don't take my word for it. Here's an advertising from the Olympian from 1941 when this man was in office, advertising a house that's near his home, because that is pointed out in the newspaper clipping here. And if you read the racial covenant, it literally says that only white people can live where George Yantis lived. And he must have been fine with that, because not only did he develop lands that had racial covenants, but he lived in the same type of neighborhoods. So much for your Democratic allies. The other fascinating thing that I find about George Yantis is the fact that he's a racist, but it's hard to find any information about that, because I had to look far and wide to find some proof of that. Because when you look at the listing here for the Belvedere subdivision, it just says Geo Yantis. And so when I did my digging, I find out that's short for George Franklin Yantis. And when you look at when he was in office in Washington State, it literally covers some of the years in which we are also mentioning these racial covenants, which lets you know that when this guy was in office, he clearly had no issue with these racial covenants. Even while being the Speaker of the House in Washington State, he did absolutely nothing to stop the racial covenants. I also find it strange how the Democratic Party of Washington State fails to mention the racism within their own party, and how they fail to mention George Yantis. If the Democratic Party in Washington State wants to grandstand and virtue signal when it comes to the issue of racial covenants, then surely they could have a come to Jesus moment about their own party's participation in this form of racism. Bigelow Lake Subdivision. No persons of any race other than the white or Caucasian race shall use or occupy any building or any lot, except that this covenant shall not prevent occupancy by domestic service. Once again, the same as the last one, but just they were very clear that if you were not white, you better be a servant, or you get chased out of town or arrested or thrown in jail. That's what happened to you. The developers were Esther and Otto Jacobson. It covered 31 properties and it came in 1940. You have Brewer extension to Mountain View. Said premises shall not be rented, sold, or leased to any black person, indigenous person, Asian person, or any person who was of mixed race. The developer was Olympia Federal Savings and Loan Association, Agnes and Wilbert Brewer, James Bates, and Kate Stevens. It covered 20 properties and it came in 1941. And so at this point, we are only up into maybe 5, 6, 7 subdivisions covered, and we're already over 700 properties that black people could not live at, or anybody who wasn't white. You have Carillon Beach. Once again, you couldn't rent, lease, or own if you were anything but white. The developer was Fred Carillon. It covered 61 properties and it came in 1959. Think about that. 1959. Surely some of your grandparents have seen this or were alive during this time. And if your grandparents were black or anything other than white, they couldn't live here. It was illegal for them to live here. You have Clear Lake Highlands. No part of any lot in said tract shall ever be used or occupied by any black person or just anyone that wasn't white. The developer was Clear Lake Highlands Incorporated. It covered one property and it came in 1928. You have Deschutes that says that no lot or dwelling shall be rented, leased, or sold to any black person or just anyone who wasn't white like all the others. The developer was John McAleer. It covered 54 properties and it came in 1947. Now you have F.W. Carillon Fairground Acre Tracts Division number 1. And Mr. Carillon shows up on this list quite often because he was extremely racist and no person who wasn't white couldn't live here. The properties covered was 7 and this came in 1934. In fact, you have Fred Carillon who had another division in the same place, number 2, number 3, and number 5. And now we're up to 885 places that non-white people couldn't live at in your so-called progressive enclave of Olympia and Thurston County, or even just Washington State. And Fred Carlyon pops up yet again with F.W. Carlyon's Sunset Edition. And he would allow people who were non-white to live there. You just had to be servants. And it covered 55 properties, and it came in 1940. Now you have Fair Oaks Beach, because good Lord, I'm so glad that we got away from Fred Carlyon, because that guy's racism was just on a superhuman level, wasn't it? And at Fair Oaks Beach, the property shall not be sold, leased, or rented to any person that wasn't white. The developer was Edward and M.R. Clifford. It covered 26 properties, and it came in 1941. Now you have Glenwood Park, and you could live there as a non-white person, but you just had to be a servant. And the developers were Raymond and Lillian Cosand, Catherine and Herbert Grancis, Alice and O.M. Cullen, William and Rose Brower, Betty and C.B. Wagner, and United Mutual Savings Bank. It covered 59 properties, and it came in 1941. Now, I want you to notice something else now. I want you to notice something when I zoom out of this map here. I want you to see how there's Tumwater Middle School, and then you have Tumwater High School, right? And I want you to notice where all of these racial covenants are. They are surrounding the schools. That is intentional. Those neighborhoods with these racial covenants, those were placed there intentionally, because this was a way of ensuring that black children would have been too intimidated to even try to attend these schools. The placement of these neighborhoods with these racial covenants, that was not an accident. This was a way of making sure that any black child or any black family who wanted their child to attend a predominantly white school, this was a way of making sure that that black child never felt safe, because they had to actually ride on the same school buses as their often racist white peers. And now you have Johnson Point, and Johnson Point was no different than any other property that we've covered so far. It was developed by the Schuler Company. It covered 12 properties, and it came in 1938. And now you have Long Lake Shore Acres, and they cut straight to the chase. They said all sales of any of these 23 properties that came in 1951 had to go to white people. And now you have Manshrex, which basically says that if you're not white, you can't sell, lease, or rent or own any property. The developer was Charles Musgrave. It covered 18 properties, and it came in 1939. And now you have Miramichi. It covered 38 properties, and it came in 1955. The developer was A.H. Steeples, and this racial covenant is no different than any other that we've covered so far. Mountain View Edition, and this one covered 105 properties, and it came in 1938. And it says the exact same kind of stuff that you saw in the other racial covenants in all of the other areas. But what makes this one so different is the developer. And now you have James Bates and Kate Stevens Bates, but the other developer is Olympia Federal Savings and Loan Association. And if you check Bloomberg, you will see that Olympia Federal Savings and Loan Association still operates to this very day. So that means that a bank who went out of their way to exclude black people are still free to operate without compensating the very black people or non-white people that they discriminated against, and they could just keep operating. I guess it does pay to be an anti-black racist. And today, the Olympia Federal Savings Bank, or OLYFED as they call themselves, have been around for about 117 years. And their CEO, who is a white man, used to examine banks prior to becoming the CEO of this once very racist financial institution. So I guess much like this bank's past, they wanted a white CEO, to send out a message. Because surely Josh Deck and other people who are associated with this bank could now offer some money towards the descendants of anyone who was black in this area, or just black people who have been residents in this area, so they can just erase this racist history and this racist stain and help the country move on. I mean, surely this bank has the money, so surely they can compensate black people in the state of Washington for the harm that has been done. Or at the very least, this bank could offer guaranteed loans to qualifying black people and then offer to pay their down payments or any other fees for a home buy, so that this bank can show that they're trying to move on from their racist past. past, and failure to do so will only show adherence to the white supremacist past of this bank. And that is my message to Josh Deck. But let's move on to the next area here. So now we're down to Norton's Addition, and it has the same rules as all of the other places that we've covered so far. You know, basically that if you're not white, you can't own, lease, or rent anything, unless of course you are a servant. The developer was Charles J. Norton. It covered 43 properties, and it came in 1952, relatively recent. And so now you have Percival's Second Edition, and it has the same rules as all the other racial covenants that we've covered so far. The developer was H.J. Maury. It covered one property, and it came in 1946. You have Pleasant Beach, and it has similar rules to all of the other racial covenants. In fact, there seems to be some copy and pasting here. So you know the racism has some solidarity. The developers were Richard A. and Edith M. Clifford, names that we've seen before. It covered 30 properties, and it came in 1946. Now you have Scott's Addition. It was developed by Clarence S. and Coralie Scott. It covered 29 properties, and it came in 1951, relatively recent, and it has the same basic rules as most of the other racial covenants. You have Scully's First Edition, same rules as the other racial covenants. It was developed by Andrew Earl King. It covered 88 properties, and it came in 1948. Now you have Stratford Park, which has the same rules as all the other racial covenants. It was developed by Theodore Frank Smith. It covered 37 properties, and it came in 1951. Once again, relatively recent. And now we're gonna hear from the Smiths very often here. 4 properties in a row. You had Stratford Place in 1928 that covered 24 properties, and it was developed by Frederick W. Schmidt. Then you had Stratford Place Annex, same rules as all the others. It covered 16 properties, and it came in 1939. It was developed by Frederick W. and Elsa Schmidt, along with Wilbur L. and Gertrude Hawthorne. Now you have Stratford Place Annex 2, same rules as all the others. It was developed by Frank T. and Adolph D. Jr. Schmidt. Ooh, Lord, that second name was a doozy, but not shocking. It covered 27 properties, and it came in 1947. You have 3 subdivisions that were unknown, but were in fact under racial covenants. And the way that you know this is that we're gonna cover unknown plat name 119 through 384. And the way that you know that these are racial covenant areas is because of the first developer, a man that you've heard several times on this list, Mr. Fred W. Caryon. It doesn't list the properties covered, but we know the plat names. So now the next unknown plat was owned by the Freemasons. Yeah, the Freemasons. It was Olympia Lodge number 1, and it has the same rules as all the other racial covenants, except they didn't even allow for servants. So I think the Freemasons have some explaining to do. Next you have unknown plat name 156 through 175, and this one does allow for a non-white servant to exist in this place. It was developed by the Schuler Company, doesn't list how many properties, but it came in 1927. And now you finally have Ward's Homestead, which pretty much outlaws anyone who isn't white. It was developed by Eva G. Hewitt. It covered 11 properties, and it came in 1945. And that's the video. Thank you so much for joining me. It took me a little minute to get the video done, but I wanted to get that done because I wanted to focus a little bit on Washington State. I mean, focusing a little bit on the Twin Cities, maybe New York City and some other places, but I wanted to do this series, Blue State, Sundown Town, because I wanted people to understand that it wasn't just the South or Republicans who were racist, as you can see from this video. But until next time, horns up, peace out, good night, and good luck. A-C-A-B, don't you step to M-E. I run to your sundown towns, then turn them upside down. But some of y'all monsters like Stranger Things in the upside down. No surrender, no retreat, certified soldier. Got receipts, you can't walk with my feet. I pack nothing but steel for the heat. I'm not soft, I'm elite. Play my anthem on repeat, now sing it with me. A-C-A-B, hating is just weak. Get off my meat, go take a seat. Came from nothing, now I'm something. Descendant of slaves, enemy slave. It's just how I was raised. Black power, temperature raised. Beautiful yet bloody days. That's why I can't be tamed. None of it was ever a game. A-C-A-B, don't step to me. Ancestral